Hello and welcome to Wrestling in 1995, Episode 4, as we take a look at the USWA. And as usual, we're going to start in January of 1995. Here are the champions going into 1995. The USWA Unified World Heavyweight Champion is Sid Vicious. The USWA Tag Team Champions are PG-13. The USWA Heavyweight Champion is Brian Christopher. The USWA Women's Champion is Miss Texas. In 1989, the CWA changed its name to the USWA, and in 1995, they were still doing Territory Studio Wrestling. One of the only promotions still doing that. The top two stars in 1995 are still Jerry the King Lawler and superstar Bill Dundee. On the first episode of USWA TV in January of 1995, we would see Doug Gilbert challenge Brian Christopher for the USWA heavyweight title. Sid Vicious would interfere, chokeslamming Brian Christopher. Doug Gilbert would do a cocky pin on Brian Christopher, but would get rolled up and Brian Christopher would get the win. Later this night, after a match, PG-13 would be challenged by Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. A wild brawl would break out with both these teams. This would lead to a match at the Mid-South Coliseum. At this Mid-South Coliseum show, we would see Sweet Georgia Brown beat Miss Texas for the USWA Women's title. Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich would win the USWA Tag Team titles, but PG-13 would be given an immediate rematch and would win back the USWA Tag Team titles. Also on this card, a double title match would take place as Unified World Champion Sid Vicious would take on USWA Heavyweight Champion Brian Christopher. Both titles were on the line, and Sid Vicious would win the match by disqualification. Both men keep their respective titles. To end this night at the Mid-South Coliseum, we would see a 4-team tournament. The first match would see the Moondogs beat the War Machines, and the second match would see the Rock and Roll Express beat Don Bass and Reggie B. Fine. In the finals of this 4-team tournament, the Moondogs and the Rock and Roll Express would go to a no contest. 5 days after this Mid-South Coliseum show, Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich would win back the USWA Tag Team titles, defeating PG-13. Miss Texas would get a rematch for the USWA Women's Championship versus Sweet Georgia Brown, and Miss Texas would win the USWA Women's title for a 9th time in her career. In February, a feud would start between Brian Christopher and superstar Bill Dundee. The rivalry between PG-13 and Tommy Rich and Doug Gilbert would continue as PG-13 would be attacked on TV by the champions, and they would try to blind Wolfie D by spraying ink in his eye. On February 6, Sid Vicious would defend the USWA Unified World title versus Jerry the King Lawler in a no disqualification match. Jerry Lawler would get the win, ending Sid Vicious' reign at 205 days. Jerry Lawler would start feuding with superstar Bill Dundee after winning the title. Lawler's first title defense was on February 13th versus Bill Dundee. It would be a successful title defense for the King, but the two would have a rematch. This time, superstar Bill Dundee would win the unified belt, ending Jerry Lawler's reign at only 19 days. On March 13th, PG-13 would win back the USWA Tag Team titles from Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich in a loser leaves town steel cage match. The USWA Women's Championship would also change hands that month as Sweet Georgia Brown would win back the title, beating Miss Texas. In March, WWF wrestler Mabel would be part of a 6-man tag team match, teaming up with Papa D and Wolfie D to take on Doug Gilbert, Tommy Rich, and Gorgeous George III. On April 3rd, we would see PG-13 successfully defend the USWA Tag Team titles versus Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. Also that night, we would see Brian Christopher lose the USWA heavyweight title to Brian Lee. And the main event that night, we would see the WWF's Razor Ramon win the USWA Unified World Heavyweight Championship from superstar Bill Dundee. On USWA TV on April 15th, Brickhouse Brown and The Gambler would win the USWA Tag Team titles from PG-13. The USWA Heavyweight Championship would be vacated, and on April 17th, Brian Lee would beat Brian Christopher to win the vacated USWA Heavyweight title. PG-13 would get a rematch on May 1st versus Brickhouse Brown and The Gambler, and PG-13 would win back the USWA Tag Team titles. Also on May 1st, Jerry the King Lawler would beat Razor Ramon to win the USWA Unified World Heavyweight Championship. Doug Gilbert would win the USWA Heavyweight Championship, beating Brian Lee. Gilbert was only champion for 16 days. He would lose that title to Brian Christopher. This was Brian Christopher's 16th reign as USWA Heavyweight Champion. On June 10th, USWA would present Memphis Memories 2. The main event that night would see the Fabulous Ones, Stan Lane and Steve Keirn, beat Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. The very next night, on the 11th, USWA would have another big show called A Night to Remember. Jerry the King Lawler would defend the USWA Unified World title versus one of his biggest rivals from the past, Joe LeDuc. Jerry Lawler would win the match by disqualification. The main event that night would be a battle royal won by Brian Christopher. On June 26, Billy Jack Haynes would beat Brian Christopher to win the USWA heavyweight title. Also that night, a double title match would take place as USWA Tag Team Champions PG-13 took on NWA World Tag Team Champions the Rock and Roll Express. The match ended in a no contest. Both teams keep their respective titles. And the main event that night, superstar Bill Dundee teamed up with The Undertaker coming in from the WWF to defeat Doug Gilbert and Jim Harris. On July 3rd, PG-13 would lose the USWA Tag Team titles in a rematch versus the Rock and Roll Express. The NWA titles were not on the line in this match. The feud between PG-13 and the Rock and Roll Express would continue. The very next week, PG-13 would win back the USWA Tag Team titles. In July, Smoky Mountain Wrestling would send their champion to the USWA to defend the Smoky Mountain Wrestling title. The champion was Nature Boy Buddy Landell. He would defend the title versus Stephen Dunn. Stephen Dunn would win the match by disqualification, but would not win the title. Nature Boy Buddy Landell would stick around the USWA and would even challenge Jerry the King Lawler unsuccessfully for the USWA Unified World Heavyweight Championship. On July 24th, the WWF's Allied Powers, Lex Luger and the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith, would be in the USWA. They would beat Billy Jack Haynes and Brian Lee in a tag team match. On August 4th, Brad Armstrong won the USWA heavyweight title by beating Billy Jack Haynes. He would only be champion for 3 days. He would lose the belt right back to Billy Jack Haynes. PG-13 would lose the USWA Tag Team titles to the Heavenly Bodies, but not long after winning the titles, the USWA Tag Team titles would be vacated. A one-night tournament would take place on August 28th for the vacant USWA Tag Team titles. The finals would see PG-13 beat Terry Gordy and Tracy Smothers to win the titles. The USWA heavyweight title would change hands on September 11th when Brian Christopher won the title from Billy Jack Haynes. On October the 2nd, the Smoking Guns from the WWF would challenge PG-13 unsuccessfully for the USWA Tag Team titles. Later that month, another team from the WWF would challenge PG-13 unsuccessfully for the USWA tag team titles. This tag team was Techno Team 2000. Another team that would show up from the WWF in October would be the Bushwhackers. The future Road Dogg Jesse James, at this point in time being called Jesse James Armstrong, would win the USWA heavyweight title, but 16 days later, he would lose it back to Brian Christopher. On October 30th, Razor Ramon would return to the USWA as the WWF Intercontinental Champion, and he would defend his title versus Brian Christopher. Brian Christopher would win, but by disqualification. On November 6th, the WWF's Ahmed Johnson would beat Jerry the King Lawler to win the USWA Unified World Heavyweight Championship. The future Phineas Godwin, wrestling under the name Tex Slazenger at this point, would win the vacant USWA heavyweight title. 5 days later, he would lose the title to Brian Christopher, but only 5 days after that, Christopher would lose the title back to Tex Slazenger. Tex Slazenger would finish 1995 as the USWA heavyweight champion. Jesse James Armstrong and Tracy Smothers, who won the USWA tag team titles in October, would finish the year as the tag team champions. Ahmed Johnson would lose the USWA Unified World Heavyweight Championship to Jeff Jarrett. And finally, the last big show of 1995 would take place on December 27th. We would see a double main event as Jerry the King Lawler would win the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Championship versus Tommy Rich. Jerry Lawler would finish 1995 as the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Heavyweight Champion. And also that night, Jeff Jarrett would successfully defend the USWA Unified World Heavyweight Championship versus Brian Christopher. Jeff Jarrett would finish off 1995 as the USWA Unified World Champion. And that was the USWA in 1995. Join me next month as we take a look at a company that was mentioned in this video. We are going to take a look at the final year of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.